The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for stopping by tonight. Those who are in the chat room, those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one. Tonight we've got a great guest lined up, and he's a stranger because he hasn't been on for about 2 months, seems like. But we'll get him introduced here in just a second. Last week I wasn't on because I was at an event at Post Town, and there was quite a few vendors there set up, but there wasn't a lot of people that actually come through. I wasn't close to that many people and wore masks. Mark Spicer and I had a table, and the table that was next to mine, Tiffany had her booth there, so at least we was able to talk anyway. So, but it was nice just to be able to get out for a change. I talked with Keith Age and a few others, and so it was good to actually just meet some people. So, with that though, we got with us tonight Barbara Duncan. Maybe.
Good evening, everyone.
And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And I'm sure that you know the guest that we got on. We got a lot of good stuff we're going to be talking with him about. So, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yeah, well, tonight we have one of our favorite returning guests, Thomas Wertman, former dean at the American National University, state director at MUFON, and former co-director of that, but still works with the Cleveland Ufology Project. And having studied business resources and such, he's learned to read people when it comes to interviewing UFO witnesses. So welcome back, Thomas Wertman.
Thank you for having me back.
All right.
And I think it was August I was on your last, Henry.
Well, it's been a while.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And we missed you. Yeah.
Oh.
But you've been pretty busy too, so we can't complain about that.
I always stay busy. I'm one of those guys that even though I retired, I'm still up at either 5 or 6 in the morning. And I start my day off, do my hobby work, do work around the house and stuff like that. And I just can't, I'm just one of those people, I just can't lay in bed till like 9, 10, 11 o'clock every day. I'm like, even though I'm retired, I'm like, I'm going to get up and get some stuff done.
Yep. I don't sleep late either. So.
Yeah, and do it.
I'd rather get up early and go to bed early. And of course, by 9 o'clock, I'm usually passed out. So if you don't hear me for a while, you're going to have to holler and wake me up.
Well, I'm not that bad yet. I've got a niece that actually goes to bed at like 6 o'clock, and she doesn't have to get up early.
Oh.
Like
The Ben Franklin
kidding
routine,
me.
early to bed, early to rise.
Right. Oh.
So I'm sure everybody missed us being on here last week, but Barbara had a good replay scheduled, so I'm sure everybody liked it. So with all that, let's find out, Barbara. Anything been going on our side here?
No, it's pretty darn quiet. We have a few new shows. We have Barry Strom on Sundays now.
I've seen that.
Yep, and kicking off there, and a show out of Louisiana, or Texas, excuse me, Spirited Bayou, and yeah, growing and growing.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
If we just get more people coming in and listen to the shows, that'd be great. So, but I understand how a lot of things been going on. People's been pretty busy, and this time of year, it's always like that. So, with that, Jeff, how you been doing?
I've been doing. We've been having some roasted temperatures in the triple digits the last few days, but it's starting to wane down. But otherwise, the economy is almost completely destroyed, so Governor Newsom is having a good time, I'm sure.
So,
And just a couple of hundred earthquakes, Salton Sea.
yeah, I've been hearing there's been quite a few of those around.
We had a good one down here in L.A.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the Salton Sea had about 135 earthquakes. It's called a swarm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm glad we don't have too much of that stuff over in our area. Although there is some, I guess, every now and then you might feel a little bit, but not very much around here. You have much up north up there, Thomas?
We haven't had that many. Although I remember it's been a number of years ago, we did have a great one though. I was at work one day at my desk, and all of a sudden the desk starts vibrating. And I'm like, what happened? Did somebody drive a tow motor by my office or what? and the boss came running and he goes, what was that? What was that? What was that? And we checked the news real quick and there was an earthquake. But we rarely get them up in this region unless somebody's over kind of like in the eastern part of the state where they maybe do some of the fracking and some of the stuff like that.
Something like that, yeah.
They may have something more along those lines, yeah.
Well, you got the New Madrid
so much
Fault
here.
there.
You got the what, Barbara?
That's right.
It's called the New Madrid Fault.
Really?
Mhm.
Is that on?
Mm-hmm.
Is that more over
It
in
lets go.
Pennsylvania?
No. I think it's more around Kentucky, the dam area, that sort of place.
Oh, okay.
Western Kentucky.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we don't get too much anyway. So,
No.
Anyway, we've been talking some stuff about. I noticed that there was something in the paper or on the news, I guess, about the government was going to be releasing some information. And have you heard anything on that yet?
Well, they started that program where they're collecting information. And initially, when you hear this thing about the government starting a special program to, gather UFO reports, you kind of get excited and you're thinking, wow, this is Project Blue Book starting all back up again with maybe more people involved, deeper investigations, and they're really looking at things seriously. And things like, let's say, for example, with Project Blue Book, one of the issues they had at times is whoever was in charge of the program basically dictated almost the direction the investigations went, as far as a skeptical point of view or a real research point of view. So you're hoping something like that's going to get back up again, but I don't think that's the case, because they put this money up for appropriations for like the next year. And the plan was that when this program was started, that every so many days a report would be sent back into the government as far as what all data was collected. And what they're going to be looking at is reports coming in from military personnel. And they were kind of like a little bit vague, I think, but you're hoping that they're going to look at things from like air traffic control, reports coming in from them, things reported at airports. And there was that hope that they're going to look at things in general that came in from like police, anybody who turned their UFO report in, that they were going to be reviewing these things. But the way it looks now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think what they're really going to be focusing on, Henry, is reports made in military operation areas. Because what they're looking for is really unidentified aerial phenomena. So it's objects that they can't explain. And they're going to be focusing on these military operation areas like off the coast of California, off the coast of the East Coast of the United States, and other areas around the country. So when there's these incursions into these areas, they look into it, and they're not saying they're looking for alien aircraft from outer space at all. They're not saying they're looking for anything interdimensional. What they're saying is we're looking at these reports for unidentified phenomena. And I think the key point they're looking at is something that may relate to a foreign power. Maybe it could be private individuals who are taking aircraft into military operation areas, and are going to be gathering reports on these. It appears to be a very serious plan. Go ahead, Barbara.
So this is more intelligence gathering than it is actual UFO work.
I think that's what it's really going to be at the end of the day. I mean, the hope was when you hear this thing being announced that, hey, they're looking for UFOs. They're looking at these objects because, as they came out and said with the reports, that when the Nimitz event happened back in 2004, 2005, when the Teddy Roosevelt event happened back like 2014, 2015, there's videos of these craft, for lack of a better word, flying through military operation areas. Now, these are areas where it's known that they're conducting exercises. And what was happening with the Nimitz and also the Teddy Roosevelt is they were doing shakedown cruises in preparation for deployment overseas. So they're going through all the regiments where they're testing out their radar systems. They're taking their aircraft up and they're going through basic maneuvers. They're going through basic flight plans. So they're following these. And these are the areas that these objects were intruding into. When the Nimitz, which is the most well-known event of them, when David Fravor was out flying, he was the commander of a squadron. His squadron was out of 2 jets, was out flying off the coast of California, about 100 miles out, kind of southwest of California. And over a period of 2 weeks, radar had been tracking objects going through. The reason I say objects, because it wasn't just one, there were multiples. They said over a period of 2 weeks, there was roughly, I think, about 100 objects that were observed over that region. The objects were being tracked on radar by a guided missile cruiser primarily. There were some signals being picked up by the radar planes out in the area, the Hawkeyes. But they weren't being tracked on the aircraft's own radar. Well, on one given day, when one of these events occurred, one of the crewmen on board of the guided missile cruiser suggested to the captain that, hey, these things have been coming in here for 2 weeks, and we don't know what it is. Maybe we should look at it and investigate it. Because at times what was happening on there was they were tracking things on the radar at excessive speeds, and basically they said, well, we don't have an aircraft that can maneuver this fast, go this fast, and make these types of motions at these speeds, so let's just ignore it. Because maybe it's a radar glitch. Maybe it's something else. Well, in this case, they went out and investigated it, and David Fravor, when he arrived at his wing person, he was at 20,000 feet. He was told that he was at the same area where the object was. He picked up nothing on his radar. The guided missile cruiser brought him in, and he did a visual and saw an object which appeared to be either on the surface of the water or possibly coming out of the water. He didn't really know for sure. So he decided to descend down to get a better look. His wing person stayed high. As he descended down, he gets about 14,000 feet or so. He's kind of like doing a circular motion going down. The object starts rising up and mirroring his action. The object, he said, looked like a tic-tac piece of candy. It appeared to turn at him. Next thing you know, he says this thing shot by him at a high rate of speed that he couldn't match, and he knows nothing in the Air Force arsenal or Navy arsenal that can match this. So this was one of the more well-known events, and then he notified one of his other pilots that did following missions, and the following pilot was one who actually got video of one of these things, of which the Navy admitted that it's his actual video from a naval aircraft. They don't know what they're capturing in the video. They have no clue. They're basically saying it was nothing that they had. So this and other encounters were similar, prompted the military to start making, these moves towards establishing a program to start looking into what's basically what's intruding in our airspace. Because again, these are 100 and some miles off the coast, and nobody knows what they are or who's operating them.
Well, it's kind of funny that the way that they're doing this, that it's just all of a sudden that this has been going on, but this has been happening for years and years. Why do you think that they're just now actually trying to bring it out and acknowledge it?
Well, it's starting to reach the surface to like the public eye, not only the public eye, but Congress. Different congressmen also started hearing about this. And they're like, wait a minute, we've got something operating off the coast and we have no clue what it is. Come on, we got to look into this because this is something potentially for national defense. This could be a serious situation. What if we find out that a foreign power is able to operate aircraft or some sort of a craft just outside of our, the 20-mile limit that we can't track, we can't stay with, we can't maneuver with? I mean, they've got to get information on whatever this thing is. So that's why they established this program to start getting radar data, getting pilot reports, getting as much information as possible and making it easier for pilots to submit information on these encounters without being ridiculed by, the other military personnel or worried about their career being destroyed.
Yeah, but Project Blue Book, if we could drop back just a minute here, was pretty high clandestine operation. I mean, for the majority of people knew nothing about or had an inkling about UFO intelligence gathering, but it really wasn't mainstream. Yes, report all your UFO stuff to us. Somebody will be in a black suit to take your report. So, I mean, this is a whole, like 180-degree turn, don't you think, in their approach?
Blue Book looked at a lot of reports that came in from various people. I mean, they looked at a number of reports from my region. Like the movie Close Encounters, the chase scene in Close Encounters is based on a UFO report from the 1960s in Ohio. That was made by two deputies, and the report eventually reached Project Blue Book, of which they said that they were chasing Venus. And then another point, they said, oh, maybe it's a satellite they were chasing. But it wasn't looked at very seriously. And part of the things that they did to base their opinion at times was basically a judgment call. Well, it must have been this they looked at. Now, as the television series presented Alan Hynek as being somebody who was working with Project Blue Book. He was a skeptic to begin with, but he became much more of a believer later on. He did look at things in a very serious manner. But I don't think they had all the tools available. In other words, you couldn't go in, you couldn't pull like flight data real quick, you couldn't pull satellite data real quick. It would be a much more lengthy process. And sometimes I think they just basically made a judgment call saying that, we think it's this. And again, that went back to, who was in charge of the program. One of the individuals who was in charge of the program was Quintanilla, and he was much more of a skeptic. And the reports during his time took on that skeptical point of view. So that was one of the unfortunate things with it. Now it looks like when these reports come in, again, they're not really being clear on the whole process that this program is going to be using. But if they see something off the coast of, let's say, California, they can get the military camera information, they can pull all the radar data, they can pull the information from the aircraft. And a number of these aircraft actually communicate together. So they're going to be grabbing all the data they can. They also have other resources available. They can go through different branches to see if they can get information. But I was hoping it was going to be much more in depth that, okay, let's say you got a number of UFO sightings, let's say like the Phoenix Lights that they had. You get a number of things like that maybe they would be looking at that, but I'm not sure if that's going to be in their realm. I think it may be much more like something in military incursions is what they're going to be looking at. If somebody sees a ton of lights over Phoenix, they may not even look at that at all.
Well, I was thinking along the lines that, there's these massive, there's science groups that are using the public to crunch a lot of data, whether it's SETI or CERN or any of those groups. And this sort of sounds like a mass data gathering by the public that the military can use, because I can just see astronomers looking out there going, hey, I don't know what this is. It doesn't act like a meteor. It doesn't act like anything I've seen. And that they're going to be able to put this into a database for basically the military to say, okay, let's go in and investigate it based on certain criteria.
Yeah, based on certain criteria, and I think that's what they're going to look at. If, let's say, that sighting that, let's say an astronomer or somebody had of what may have potentially been a meteor, if that happens in an area where there's probably a military incident where there's an encounter, they'll probably pull that potential correlating information into it. But if it's standing on its own, they may not look at it whatsoever.
So you don't think that they're actually going to be looking very much at sightings that's over land around any country, because they're mainly looking for stuff that's in the 20-mile offshore range.
Well, they may be looking at something like over the United States. There's a lot of military operation areas over the United States. Now, we've got some here in Ohio, in southern Ohio, but you pretty much have like local National Guard, Air National Guard units using those. And it's not like it's on a regular basis as far as like every day. So probably where you're going to see the highest activity at, or something, I think more so, Henry, that's in an area where it can potentially go back to national defense, like along the coast. I'm just wondering if something along maybe like the Mexican-Canadian borders, along those borders and through there. Specialized areas, like Area 51, if they happen to see incursions out in that region. Or there's a number of other ones out west the same way. I personally just think they're going to be focusing a lot on those military areas because that's where they're going to be able to gather the best data from aircraft, from naval vessels, who knows, maybe satellite data, try to grab that. But I think that's where they're going to get the best information from. And that's going to be the areas that really go back to that big thing of national security. That's what I think is really going to affect what they look at.
I wonder.
Well, as we get closer to perhaps some sort of disclosure about UFOs, and it makes me kind of wonder if at some point the military, world governments are starting to think disclosure, even if it's by the aliens or ET themselves, rather than through Earth governments, that they're getting just a little bit more defensive?
Maybe, because when I looked at some of the things they were talking about, as they said, like in these reports for the military, they also made a comment that a lot of that stuff is going to be remaining as almost like a closed book, that they are not necessarily going to make that information public that they gather from these encounters, like they had back in 2004. They're going to gather the data, review it, look at it. So in a sense, Barbara, I mean, if depending on what they release, and it may be heavily redacted for all we know, because we haven't really seen anything like that yet. But that may be the appearance that, hey, we're going to keep our information on what we got. And if disclosure happens, it's going to happen on some event maybe that, we can't cover up anymore. It just happens on a major level. But they're just going to keep gathering data. And one of the things I was thinking about over the last week real heavily is all this data they've been collecting, what if they've been, if there's events like Roswell, other events like that where they've recovered these crashed objects and they've been working on reverse engineering, maybe some of these things we're also seeing is the result of some of that reverse engineering after 70 years. That may be some of the things they're seeing off the coast. Because it always makes me wonder if there isn't some black program going on that somebody really doesn't know about. I mean, it would be very dangerous flying these objects into military operation areas and not let the personnel that's operating that area, let's say like the Navy, the Nimitz fleet, let them know that, hey, you're bringing in this test ship, this test aircraft that you've developed, and you're flying it around naval fighters without them knowing about what it really is. I mean, there could be a collision, there could be other incidents. But the reason I say that, Barbara, is I found an interesting article that came out, and it was made by Dr. Will Roper, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition and Logistics. He made a comment that the Air Force is flying the next generation fighter. That it's not just on paper, it's already in the air. Now, he's very vague on what the fighter looks like. He was very vague on, is it manned, is it unmanned? But he says it's not just a model, it is a full working version of the next generation aircraft.
And would that be like a UFO type thing?
This is what they're not saying. They're not implying anything on what it looks like. But they're basically saying that, hey, we've got like the F-35s. This is beyond that. This is the next generation fighter that is already in the air.
Hmm. So,
and kind of like go ahead.
Have you heard whether they have actually said that they have been able to pick up some kind of transmission between the objects? I know that they were chasing more than just one at a time, right?
Right. They're chasing more than one, but they didn't pick up any transmissions. But these objects moved basically in somewhat like a unison. I don't want to say a formation, but they moved in kind of like a unison. There was more than one. But there's something interesting I found in kind of like a related thing. What's going on at Area 51 right now? You always wonder about places like Area 51, Henry, that when planes like the F-117, they're going out of service.
Right.
There's still some flying yet, but they're mostly out of service, I believe. You wonder what they're working on next. And like the areas where like they developed like the SR-71 Blackbird, the hangars and stuff they use for that. What's going on in those hangars now?
Right.
Well, there's individuals looking at the construction that's going on at Area 51. And there's different hangars being built, but they said there's an interesting hangar now it's really more, it's not a true hangar. It's more like just a, almost like a tent-like structure that's put up, that's all open-sided. That you can't see what's underneath of it, but it's shielding stuff from the air, but it's all open. Huh. And the speculation is they're testing swarms of drones. So they're taking not one or two, but they're looking at flying many more than that out in Area 51. And they said Area 51 to be perfect because it's not a huge area. You still have a lot of land around there, but for smaller drones flying around, it may be perfect for testing. And they're looking at flying these unmanned drones in swarms.
Huh.
So when I hear like the Nimitz story, I'm thinking, wow, they're flying these UFOs that's being spotted, or more than one, multiples. It almost kind of reminds me of the swarm type thing.
So how could they fly in unison if they're not picking up any kind of communication between them? Are they pre-programmed maybe?
pre-programmed, or who knows? Maybe they've got a form of communication we're just not detecting. The ones that they're working on at Area 51, they speculate that the reason they built this huge structure that they could put like a bunch of these little drones underneath is they could do the testing on the electronics and the other devices to see how well they work in unison, to see how well they communicate with each other, and it's all being shielded under base like a canopy.
Well, Japan already has robots that can be controlled virtually using sense gloves and VR goggles. And you can plug into a computer and run these robots virtually from across the world. So it wouldn't be a big leap of faith to think that there is an operations center somewhere that can control these drones simply by sight, or a joystick for that matter.
You're right. You're right, Barbara. And that was one of the things that I looked at, like in the, I guess you could say, connected to reverse engineering. That, you know, the number of times when I've been out and we've been talking in groups about these or about UFOs, what the people eventually ask me about, well, what about Roswell? You know, do you think we recovered anything? And I said, well, you know, I don't see an artifact in front of me. I've heard about reported artifacts, but I haven't seen the physical artifact in my hand. But you hear these incredible stories. And you have to say, okay, what if we recovered one of these objects or more than one of these objects back in the 1940s? What would you do with it? Well, according to stories, you hear things being transported back to Wright Field, which is now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And different ones sometimes say, well, you know, a lot of what we have now is based on maybe reverse engineering. But on the other hand, what if we couldn't really have the breakthrough on reverse engineering until closer to now, 70 years later? We may be seeing some of the fruits of this reverse engineering. What if some of these craft that they're observing off the coast are test aircraft that we're seeing that are flying by means of propulsion that, you know, we're not familiar with? Gravity, whatever, you know, anti-gravity machines. And then the control mechanisms, like you mentioned, from what David Fravor and some of the ones we're describing, here's these things going up to speeds of like 4,000 miles an hour or more. If we were on board one of those craft, you'd be splattered like a bug in the windshield, you know, if this thing took off just by the pressure. The other thing is you're flying with these craft at super high speeds. If you think about turning or making maneuvers, by the time the human reacts to control this craft to make a turn at a certain point, they may be way beyond the point they intended on turning at. Well, this is where virtual reality was developed at originally, was for the military. They were looking at things along these lines. Well, what if, like you're saying, Barbara, we've now figured out the form of controls of these craft, and these things may be working on much more of a method, like you're saying, virtual, or basically being controlled by the mind. As we know now, I mean, you've got more devices that's being developed that can be controlled by the mind, implants. You've got like artificial eyes being able to implant or put images of what people potentially be seeing if these electronic eyes into their mind. What if now we're just making that breakthrough of a lot of these devices that maybe were recovered and have been reverse engineered, just to throw something out there.
Which kind of, it's interesting when you bring that up, because it makes me wonder if maybe the next step towards Mars colonization is going to be some sort of VR-controlled spaceship and robot, just because right now the radiation is a factor, where it wouldn't necessarily be for robotics. And then we could get a virtual feel for the planet, even just by remote, temporarily, to build a colony first before you actually introduce humans to it.
And you're right. That would be the safest way to do it, to explore. is you do it virtually. They were also talking about putting things on the moon, robotic, to assist with normal everyday operations. That way it minimizes the human.
Right. Because they can't stay up there for long periods of time because of the radiation.
Exactly the same thing. So it would make sense to me. But
Which
I
also, what you were bringing up about speed, and it kind of makes me wonder with any sort of, even with perhaps interdimensional travel, if it would scramble too much. And a lot of what we're seeing aren't necessarily biological aliens, but some sort of robotic probe.
That's correct. And that's another thing, is that we may be seeing some sort of a probe that's robotic, that's being controlled, like you say, virtually.
Well, now, I know.
And,
go ahead, finish.
oh, go ahead, Henry.
I know that a lot of times when they've reported UFOs and things like that, that they were able to, like when someone was abducted, they would be saying that these things didn't actually talk, but they used their mind some way to communicate with you. Would they still be able to do that and control different ships and stuff?
I don't know. I haven't done that one yet, Henry. But I've been involved in that one. I've been involved in my own personal one of the mind, but who knows how far they can control things. And I just think really like the virtual way, controlling things remotely, or maybe they have a way of basically when best comparison I could make is there was a Steven Spielberg miniseries on. It was called Taken. Now, this isn't the Taken movie with
right.
Liam
Neeson, but this is the one that they took a lot of the historical UFO moments over the years and condensed them into a miniseries. And some of the stuff was based around Roswell. In one of the parts of the miniseries, they'd recovered craft, but they were trying to basically fly the craft. The craft was flown by not human controls like we think of, like steering wheels and so forth, rudders, etc. But they basically put their hands into a unit, and it almost like linked the mind directly into the craft. Now that's what I'm looking at, is what if there's a way to basically link that person into the craft by, let's say, touch or whatever, the mind. That way it minimizes the transfer time of thinking, and the hand motions and everything else. It goes directly into the machine, for lack of a better word. Now, the problem that they ran into in the miniseries that, per the story, was the human mind wasn't strong enough.
Right.
And the people were actually dying because it was too much of a strain on their mind and they couldn't handle it. So they actually were looking for a hybrid who'd had a much stronger mind.
That was the movie with
brain.
Parker Posey and Dirk Benedict.
Okay.
I remember it. Because they were, and it kind of interesting that you bring that up, because they kind of linked it to Stargate in a way, because they were recruiting psychics to try to figure out how the machine would work.
Yeah.
As I recall. Yeah.
Yeah, and the one of Spielberg, I remember they had like twin women that were like psychics, something along those lines, that they brought in. They were looking for people that had ESP, things along those lines. And that's why they went after the hybrid, basically, towards the end, is because they needed something strong enough. So, it makes me wonder that maybe, since these things are moving very quickly, if something is on board, there's must be a direct communication with the craft almost. There's no hand motions, nothing like that controlling the craft. It's all through the mind. But it would also make sense, Barbara, as another, I guess you could say another step to that. What if they're not even there? Maybe it's being done completely virtual. That way, it could be potentially even done across the dimension.
Well, a computer can think that fast, can it?
Computers should think that fast.
Yeah.
And that's based on our technologies we have now.
So I wonder if it's computer controlled.
Possibly. There's just so many things that we just don't know. That's the thing. And that's why when I look at like the military gathering data, maybe they're still in the dark as much as we are. And they're trying to gather every little crumb that they can to maybe put more of the pieces together if it's something that's not theirs.
And I would have to assume that other foreign countries are having to do the same thing because they've got the same stuff going on there also.
Oh, yeah. You'd never hear it coming out of China, but they have to have the same things going on in China. You hear stories at times coming out of Russia, but some of the stuff I've seen is more like stuff being made up for YouTube, and it could be a combination of maybe just people posting wild stuff, just it's made up, or it could be a way of even putting out disinformation on what they're working on or what they know.
And you stop to think that it looks like most of the elements are universal. So whatever they're constructing materials out of, it's something that we could theoretically reverse engineer because we could develop, or the elements are already on Earth to come up with the metals, etc. Right?
You're right. And that was another thing I was actually thinking about the other day, Barbara, is if you recovered a craft, let's say we got a Roswell or one of these other crash events, what would you do with it? Well, first of all, I'd actually bury the thing below ground in a secure facility. Because the reality is if you recovered something, how long will it take to reverse engineer something? And if you put it below ground, you really restrict access. You don't even create like a hangar door for it to get out. You completely seal it in because you know it's going to be decades or who knows, millennia before you can reverse engineer that thing. This way it restricts access.
Like whatever's buried under the Skinwalker Ranch Road?
Okay. Since you want to bring that up.
Wait, did I miss an episode of the Skinwalker Ranch show that something's buried under the road? Oh, that's no. I do now. I do remember they did. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so there is a comparison, but also there was supposedly like things put below ground at Wright-Patterson, and there's supposedly a lot of things below ground that you don't see going on at Wright-Patterson. What if a base? I'm not saying Wright-Patterson only, but what if a base along those lines? You put something below ground, you work on it, you reverse engineer it. First of all, I don't want to destroy the original. And the bad part about reverse engineering is sometimes the testing and the methods to examine it are destructive. Well, if you've got two of them, then okay, it gives you more leverage. You can work on one and keep the other one intact. So it's kind of like that project you're on a computer. You don't overwrite the disk, basically. You want to keep everything as intact as possible without destroying the original. And to me, I think one of the easiest ways, maybe, I could be completely wrong, but one of the easiest things to reverse engineer first would potentially be the materials it's made from. Because like you say, Barbara, if it's normal elements we're familiar with, it's learning how to put those elements into a form like they have, using whatever ratios they're using. That may be one of the easiest, because when I look at other methods, like let's say control systems, that could be so completely wide open. I mean, back sometimes when you read about crashes like back in the 50s and so forth on there, and I'm not saying the crashes were actual, but you had people reporting seeing controls that you could almost equate back to like a normal aircraft. You had dials, you had other things inside of them. But what if you looked at something that didn't have physical controls? What if you looked at something like I was suggesting earlier with the series Taken, where somebody just put their hand down in this thing and it made contact and somehow connected with the human mind. If you recovered one of those 1940s, you wouldn't have the ability to reverse engineer that thing maybe until now. You'd start learning, you'd start understanding how it works. The same would be true with propulsion systems. I mean, in the 1940s, we were just in the infant stages of jet engines. But what if you see something that's anti-gravity? Even if you pulled in people like Tesla, I mean, and had them on it for years, I mean, it may take them, again, decades to be able to start fathoming how this thing really works. And then you'd also have to be able to develop the technology to make this stuff. So we may just now be seeing some of the signs of that reverse engineering.
So, I mean, I could sort of see the burying part, even if we were being a little bit cautious about somebody trying to come back and retrieve a crashed vehicle. And with our lack of technology back then to know that there was ground penetrating radar and you could find it probably fairly easy. That burying also was an act of secrecy, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. To keep everything as secret as possible. Okay. That way you have minimal access. I mean, anybody going into the thing would have to go through like tunnels, whatever, to get down to this thing. Also, I was thinking about, okay, so let's say a foreign power hears you've recovered this object. They try to get, of course, spies to get in to see what's going on. Well, we have this happening at different facilities now which work on military projects where spies try to get in, spies try to take things out, drawings, etc. If you put it below ground, you restrict as much as possible people taking stuff back out without being observed. So it minimizes that. And the biggest thing is you know you can't get it out. They couldn't take the physical craft itself out, not without extreme measures. And then if you want to build one, maybe by then you've got the technology. You can build that thing elsewhere, not at that same location. And it's not one company building it. You compartmentalize the heck out of it so that you have a company like Raytheon working on maybe one part, Lockheed working on another part, and nobody really knows what the other ones are really doing. And very few know about the entire project coming together.
Yeah. And now I really want to take a backhoe to that road on Skinwalker Ranch.
I'll go with you, Barbara. How's that?
It makes sense. That well that they opened up and he had a radiation burn on that might have been the access point.
It may have been, and then that radiation also dissipated, if you remember. That they went back and checked and it wasn't there at another time. But
that could have been a booby trap too, possibly.
True, but it makes you wonder, was something there and was something underground? And what was it?
And if they had booby traps like that means they had to have something that they didn't want people to know about.
True. And who knows what it is? I think we'll have to wait to season 3? Season 2?
Maybe. Well, if it goes the way Oak Island has, we're on season 7, and they still haven't found anything yet. So
I've heard that they've already filmed 2 seasons ahead already.
Nice.
For Oak Island. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
No, not Skinwalker.
There for a second.
Yeah.
I do know that they've got the next season of Destination Fear coming out too, which is a fun show.
It's a fun show.
Well, it is. It's two friends and one of their sisters. The host used to be a cameraman for Zach Baggins, and they go to some of the most haunted areas, reputedly haunted areas, and the three of them they're not officially scaredy cats, but they've been overcoming their natural inclination to run, and I find it very funny. It's mostly unintentionally funny sometimes, and sometimes it's just plain funny. And it's a cute show. They haven't gone to Post Town, but they have been. Where are they? I'm trying to think of some of the places they've been that we know about. I'm pretty sure they went to Mansfield at least, off the top of my head. But West Virginia, the jail down there, or such like that. They've been to a lot of places. Fun show. On the Travel Channel, all paranormal, almost all the time.
So, and it's interesting because these UFO shows, and we've talked about this before, is I know they're trying to be scientific, and I know they're trying to be data-driven in their findings, but it would seem to me that if they had a psychic on there who can start maybe sensing things, like we were talking about what was under the road and what was in that house, and it kind of makes you wonder if they had somebody there that could say, drill here or drill there, it would make more sense.
Yeah, you're right, Barbara. I mean, if you had somebody there that says, I have this feeling in this area, more so than here, at least try it,
Yeah. But then
at least try it.
You'd have to have a really good medium or psychic who you could actually depend on or trust.
Or somebody who's had experience with UFO and alien psychics, for a better word, or had a psychic experience or a link.
Well,
then it makes it a little bit more, oh yeah, I get that weird feeling that I used to have over here.
That would be Thomas. We take him.
I'm available. I'm not doing anything right now. Now I will maintain social distancing.
I guess maybe then we're going to have to start our own show then, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just putting the word out there. If anybody is listening, hey, I'm available.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I would be willing to take that trip out to Skinwalker Ranch, and really be curious, because I had somebody else the other day tell me that they see an aura around me, and it's kind of a yellowish color. He says it looks like a bubble.
That ain't from where you got scared, is it?
No.
Kind of yellow?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. They just said it's kind of a yellow color. And said now we're gonna get off. Yeah, sorry, Barbara.
You may
I
have
got onto this roll now.
Yeah. You may have put that up there yourself as a means of blocking them, because you were talking about blocking them.
Okay, Barbara. That you started it now. Okay.
Here we go.
Uh-oh.
You started it.
Uh-oh.
Warm up the engines.
Uh-oh.
The glove's coming up.
This has come out only once before. Nobody ever heard this part before about my story. But back in, matter of fact, just to let you know that I was told that it is a protective bubble that has been put up around me. That was what the psychic told me. He said there is a protective bubble around you.
Is it that you put up, or from when you had been abducted and they put it up?
Okay, now let me tell you my side of the story of this.
Okay.
After I heard that, well, back in the 1960s, and it had to be like 1967, somewhere in there, when I was having my experiences. And just for those that, may have not heard the stories before, back in the 1960s, I started having bouts of sleep paralysis, and they were almost on a nightly basis. It started migrating into the feeling that something was coming towards me every night, was coming for me. It was coming from always from a certain direction, like it was just coming from that same point all the time. I thought as a kid, I'm like, looking for the monsters under the bed, basically, but I kept looking for something in the room. I felt something was there. And there were times also, Henry, that I observed the shadow type figures in the corner of the room. Well, I started getting very paranoid. Something was coming every night. And I started mentally creating a shield around my body. And I started every night as I'm laying down, create the shield, put it up. They can't get to you, or whatever can't get to you. Shouldn't say they can't, but whatever it is can't get to me. Well, so that your listeners also know, I've gone through regressions back to those same time frames where I was having encounters with the Greys, that the Greys were the ones that were coming. And I was trying to keep that from happening. And when the psychic looked at me a couple weeks ago and said, you've got this yellow protective bubble around you, it's almost like to keep something out. I told the psychic then my story, and she says, well, you've probably created it, and it's now there, period. It's like you created it, and it can't come down. Or you've got it to a point that it's not coming down to this day. But here's the part, though, too, Barbara. She told me, she says, they're still not done with you. I sensed that.
Oh.
They're not done with you yet.
Sound like they're going to send some different ones that maybe can break down the shield.
I don't know, but I never told anybody about that, creating that bubble around me. But I created that out of fear. And at times you look back and you say, was this a childhood fear that, you developed as a kid that something was coming, like the monsters in the closet? But when I went through the regression, it's about 7 years ago now, something like that, regressions, it indicated something potentially totally different, that there were encounters back then, and a number of encounters around that time frame. And that's also when I saw the one UFO at treetop height. It was only about 30 feet above me, hovering as I was walking through the woods. It's I did it with a buddy of mine. We both had the encounter together, and he didn't see the UFO, and I never told him to look up. And unfortunately, I can't go back and see his side of the story now, because I found out he passed away years ago. And the curiosity in my mind is, why did he pass away? But these events I had went on for also a period of maybe about 10 years overall when I go back and look at it. And from what individuals have told me off and on, it's still happening occasionally. That I don't know whether they're coming in checking on me saying, hey, are you tucked in at night, or they're saying, hey, let's check to see how you're doing. Maybe, finding out something about me physically. I don't know. Have no clue. But one of the wild stories I heard one night that you look at on the surface and say, maybe it's something somebody made up. On the other hand, you say, what if it's true? Was when one of my friends who's in MUFON on the towards the East Coast, we were talking one night, and she says, I've got a friend that she has had experiences over the years with encounters and abduction. Really? And she goes, yeah, she was on board of a craft the one time, and she says she's talking about all these other people on the craft and talking to one person in particular, and she goes, the more I heard her story, she goes, it sounded like you. I said, what? She goes, yeah, this is about 7 years ago now. She goes, it sounded about you, like you. And she goes, you want to know the freaky part? She goes, I took a bunch of pictures, laid them on a table, and she goes, well, what did the guy look like? And she pulled the picture she pulled out was yours. And I'm thinking, if you're making this up, you're doing a great job of freaking the heck out of me right now, You're doing a fantastic job. But, you also look at the fact that, could this be why that bubble's still there. Then in the back of my mind, somewhere back in the subconscious, I feel like it's still happening. Not on a regular basis, but maybe occasionally. And there's something maybe just trying to prevent it, you know? And maybe on that night, whatever it was, whenever that happened, it didn't work.
Well, and here's the other thing to this, and the clinical side of me wants to say, is that, okay, you're an anomaly. And if I were an alien studying different psychological reactions or physiological reactions with a human, I'd want to keep those anomalies and study them. Right?
Right.
True.
So, I mean, maybe that's why she's saying they're not finished with you, is because if you are that anomaly, and it's an interesting thing that they are going to come back and check, because they're trying to figure out, okay, how did they do that? What caused that to happen? That bubble there? Interesting. We're going to have to figure out how to get around this. And maybe that's what they're coming back and trying to do, right?
Well, true. And then also remember, I mentioned to you before that during the regressions, I had the feeling that when I was being regressed, and I still keep thinking about this, is I was laying down at a table, no medical equipment around me whatsoever, just this room that had you couldn't really make out any details. Just have like a curved ceiling, dome ceiling. And here this being is looking me in the face, and the being had these huge black eyes. You describe it as the gray, and it really freaked me out because it kind of reminded me, Barbara, of that, the doctors when they put the mirror on their head. I remember that as a kid. I had the feeling it was almost looking at me like that, like, okay, it's looking me in the eyes. Where's the mirror at on top of its head, to go along with it, So this thing is looking at me, and when it was looking, it was like it was reading into my mind, looking into my mind, not physically examining me, but seeing what my mind is doing, what I'm thinking, my reactions. Maybe that's what was really looking at, emotions, what my emotions were like. And at one point, I felt like I could view this, like all of a sudden I connected into it, like here's this connection that we had mentally all of a sudden. And the thing, it wasn't like now it was a one-way street where I was looking at what my mind was. It was actually a two-way street. So I was seeing what was going through its mind and expanding out into almost like a hive effect, connecting with others of its same type. And the best reaction I can make is it seemed to have no emotions, but it was like almost the closest I can compare is startled when that happened, when that connection happened. That was not supposed to happen. And, kind of thinking back on that whole thing now, because I'd kind of forgotten about that bubble thing until she brought it up the other day. But maybe that was something that, who knows, if that bubble is there, maybe that was something that was helped being created by that connection, that there's something that's been kind of opened up that wasn't there before. Who knows? Just throwing that out for thought.
Well, we can talk more about this after the break, and I think it's about time for us to take a quick break. So just remember, your mics are all live. We'll be out probably about 5-6 minutes, maybe if that long, and we are going to let, I guess, Jeff, you take us out. Is that the way it is?
Yeah, pretty much for a few years now. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's always excellent and wonderful guest, Thomas Wertman. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.